It's been a week since the first presidential debate, and the fallout continues for President Biden. The president's performance has renewed calls for him to step down and allow a younger candidate to take his place. But the Biden campaign and top Democrats say there are no plans for the president to step down from the ticket. But will voters continue to stand by Biden? Former President Trump and his campaign took a victory lap following the debate, but received criticism for a number of false statements he made during the forum. This week, Trump received a victory in the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling, with the High Court ruling Trump can expect at least some level of immunity when it comes to his time in office, slowing down his criminal cases surrounding his handling of classified documents and election interference. Biden slammed the ruling in remarks on Monday, saying that the decision leaves virtually no limits on the presidency. So how does the Supreme Court's latest ruling impact the presidential election? Here to go on the record is Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science for Decision Desk HQ. Scott, it's always good to see you, and we have a lot to unpack in here, so I'm going to jump right into it. That Supreme Court ruling, it comes as the High Court has made a number of rulings recently. This latest one obviously found that Trump has at least some immunity for official acts, along with we've seen the court rule on rulings about abortion access and how prosecutors can charge January 6th defendants. Biden and Democrats are pushing back on a number of these decisions. You know, it's interesting, Scott, in 2016, you saw Republicans campaign heavily, and also in 2020, campaign heavily on the issue of the Supreme Court and appointing conservative justices. Do you think we could see Democrats, sort of flip that strategy so it suits them?
Yeah, no, I look, the backlash over the Supreme Court rulings yesterday among the Democratic Party seems to be pretty swift. And look, the Democratic approval ratings of the Supreme Court are way down over the last year. It is a partisan issue. It's something that they can motivate and certainly raise money and rile up the base on. That's for sure.
So in terms of rallying the base and maybe peeling off some independent swing voters, is this a galvanizing factor, and how do these decisions impact voter turnout?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. There's been a few turnout related questions in and around the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court being a lightning rod for voter turnout is relatively a new phenomenon in the last 5 or 6 years. We can see some things in and around the overturn of Roe v. Wade. That certainly helped Democratic turnout over the last couple of years. We'll see if these rulings have the same effect. But just looking at the fundraising data in and around these rulings, in and around the Supreme Court, and what images the Democrats are using among fundraising emails is pretty telling that it is a motivating factor. Independents are a little bit more split. The data on the independents is still split. Half of them still have a pretty high approval rating. The other half don't. We'll see if something like this really moves it. But it's certainly a base type motivating factor.
I want to move towards the other top political story, which is last week's presidential debate. This was the first time Biden and Trump faced off in the 2024 cycle. Have we seen any major shift nationwide for voters, responding to the first debate? Obviously, Biden and Trump were both criticized, but it seems like Biden has gotten the brunt of the criticism surrounding the performance.
So just looking at the DDHQ Hill forecast and polling average, we've had about 9 polls as of about Monday post-debate. 7 of them are national, 2 of them are at the statewide. The national polls were not mixed, slight movement towards Trump, but we're going to have to see more so we can see a potentially 2 or 3 point move, but about a 1 point move towards Trump. And then we've had 2 statewide polls, one in Michigan that was favorable for Trump, and another one in New Hampshire that was very favorable for Trump. New Hampshire wasn't a battleground state a week ago, and the polling average indicates it might be going to the fall. The forecast still looking at all the different factors, still thinks New Hampshire's solidly in Biden's corner. I think these are the early indicators of some probably statewide polls we're going to see in the coming weeks that show a slight shift towards Trump.
Yeah, that New Hampshire poll certainly raised some eyebrows yesterday. But, during the debate, we know that a lot of voters were focused on President Biden's mental acuity, also on Trump's mental acuity. Biden's 81, Trump is in his late 70s, so this was a big issue. And a post-debate CBS YouGov poll shows that 72% of registered voters said they do not feel that Biden has the mental and cognitive health to serve as president. Scott, how alarming are these numbers for the Biden campaign?
They should be very alarming because, you pointed the CBS YouGov poll. There was another Morning Consult poll that showed similar numbers. And this is not a new phenomenon. We've been talking about the polls and these types of questions for months now in the Biden, as we lead up to this debate. This is something they've been tracking. This is not something they discovered post-debate. And this is just another data point to show that the majority of voters, this isn't just a partisan issue, majority of voters are worried about, President Biden's mental and acuity fitness to be president.
I want to stick with that same CBS YouGov poll. When asked why President Biden shouldn't be running, 86% say it was because of his age. Now, the president has stated he isn't a young man anymore, but are his advisors and Democrats pushing him to show voters that his age shouldn't be a concern?
Yeah, that's certainly the narrative they're pushing post-debate. But, it's a narrative they've been pushing for pretty much his entire presidency, and certainly as the campaign heats up. And the numbers are moving. You put up the 86% number again. There's lots of polls that support that or support that trend and show similar things. It's a strategy they're trying. It does not appear to be working.
So Democrats are saying there is no way Biden will step aside this election. But hypothetically, if there was a chance Vice President Kamala Harris took over the ticket, how does the vice president poll nationwide?
So at the Hill DDHQ polling average, we just put one up yesterday, and it's interesting from a head-to-head standpoint. VP Harris is behind Donald Trump, very similar to where Joe Biden is today. She's a little bit more behind Joe Biden. I think the advantage for her is it's a fresh slate. She doesn't come in with the initial questions about her age that Joe Biden does. She comes in with some questions about her favorability and her electability, but it's something that she can campaign vigorously on. I'm not quite sure she's going to be the shot to the ticket if she's at the top that the Democrats think, but the upside for her is she's going to have 5 months to campaign if they decide to move her to the top.
Yeah, and she automatically gets access to that money the Biden campaign has raised, something that some of these other potential floated replacements in a hypothetical scenario probably wouldn't get. So back to Biden's age and the debate performance, it's interesting because down ballot Republicans are already seeking to tie their Democratic counterparts to Biden's performance. It's interesting, the Senate Republican campaign arm put out a clip of Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey and Montana Senator Sherrod Brown, essentially saying they have faith in the president's ability to do the job and that he, as Tester said it, is 100% with it. Do you think the strategy for Republicans works for Democrats who are running their own races in their own states?
Yeah, no, it's the other Democrat supporting Joe Biden is John Fetterman, which everyone should go look up some of his latest tweets on that. Probably not good for this show, but it's a strategy they're trying. It'll be interesting to see if some of this sticks. I've seen a little bit of the messaging that you pointed out. The NRC is also playing around with saying, hey, these Democratic senators and congressmen knew. And they should have told us, and they shouldn't be sticking by. And we'll see if that sticks. I don't know that voters are gonna blame that too much. But look, in campaigns, you never want to talk about anything other than your issue. And this is forcing some of the Democratic senators in some of these battleground states to talk about something they don't want to talk about, even if it's not their fault.
So I want to go back to the horse race and take a closer look at Decision Desk's forecast comparing a number of battleground states. Trump has continued to lead in most swing state polls, but Biden seems to have made some movement recently. What are the president's chances at winning, Michigan? We've heard a lot about battleground Michigan. That's been a big focal point for the coverage surrounding the president.
Yeah, so Prior to the debate, Joe Biden was a mid-50s favorite to win Michigan, probability-wise. Post-debate, it's ticked down a few points. It's just over 50% probability-wise. That's probably his best upper Midwest state of the trio of states he must win to be reelected. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania are those three. Joe Biden's not doing as well in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin right now, but Michigan seems to be his glimmer of hope, and we'll see if that holds out, because I think we're going to see some new Michigan polls in the next week or so. And again, it's been in the news. Governor Gretchen Whitmer apparently said that it was not winnable after the debate. I don't know that she was looking at any private polling we haven't seen already, but it's certainly a state everyone's looking at.
Right. And another state everyone is looking at is Nevada, obviously a very important Senate race there and also a presidential swing state. What's Decision Desk forecasting there?
So right now it is slightly favored for Joe Biden. Again, that one's been going back and forth over the last month or so, ever since Donald Trump did a pretty famous rally there a couple weeks ago where he said he was going to remove taxes for tipped workers. And Nevada's got a lot of tipped workers in and around the Las Vegas area. So, and again, that is going to be one of those canary in the coal mine states for Donald Trump as he comes out of the debate. If he starts, pulling away and taking the lead in states like Nevada, Arizona, New Hampshire, as we talked about earlier, those types of things, those are the states that are going to start freeing up and potentially make this a landslide in a post-debate world.
Yeah, I look at the hospitality industry, particularly in Las Vegas, and the power of the culinary union, which has historically supported Democrats. So any lead for Trump there would be remarkable. So I want to switch gears and move to another big political story this week. Steve Bannon reported to prison to serve out a 4-month sentence for contempt of Congress. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene was standing in front of the prison with Bannon voicing support for so what type of political influence does former President Trump's advisor still have from prison?
The Steve Bannon thing is interesting to me. We've seen a little bit of polling on him in the Republican Party, and with the exception of maybe 5 to 10% of the very hardcore Republican Party, most people don't know who he is or really care for that matter. He certainly is very influential and mentioned quite a bit in and around the president's circle. He said, to be quite frank, he said some pretty crazy stuff. It's one of those things. He's a newsmaker, but I'm not quite sure how he's going to affect the electorate. But it does appear he's going to be in and around any potential Trump White House. Yeah,
he's certainly a focal point for the Trump and America First MAGA movement. Moving to the progressive side of the aisle, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is attacking AIPAC after it spent millions of dollars in New York to oust fellow Progressive Squad member Jamal Bowman. The congressman had been very vocal about his stance on Israel. Are there any other progressive members of the squad in Congress who could face the same fate? As I understand it, Cori Bush is up next for her primary.
Yeah, and that's the one we're looking at coming in August. Is Cori Bush represents St. Louis. Won a pretty bruising primary a few cycles ago herself. She's had some other scandals in her congressional term the last couple of years as well. She's facing a tough primary, and it's another target of as AOC has pointed out, the AIPAC crowd and the pro-Israel crowd. We're looking for a pretty close one there in a month, that's for sure.
Well, Scott Tranter, thank you so much for joining us to break it down as always.
Thanks for having me.
A coalition of groups attempting to enforce the separation of church and state recently filed a lawsuit against Louisiana after the state ruled schools must post the 10 Commandments in every public classroom. Despite today's controversy, ever wonder why those commandments never became law? Staff writer Raphael Bernal takes an in-depth look back at how we got from the 10 Commandments to our modern-day law.
Louisiana's decision to display the 10 Commandments in all public classrooms was followed by the Oklahoma Board of Education's decision to incorporate the Bible in public instruction. The moves predictably set off a political firestorm, and let's not get into that. But they raise a bigger question. There's no doubt the 10 Commandments are a huge influence on Judeo-Christian legal traditions. So why aren't they the law? Well, let's start in order. At first glance, it looks like the First Commandment and the first phrase of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution directly contradict each other. As we all know, James Madison wrote the Bill of Rights, and that's where he chose to start. Madison, he didn't have it out for religion. He was a practicing Anglican, and he was educated in Presbyterian Princeton University. That might not seem like a huge difference in today's non-denominational world, but it taught Madison what it meant to be the religious odd man out. And when he wrote that First Amendment, he was writing for Anglicans, Presbyterians, Evangelicals, Quakers, you name it. So he turned it upside down. Instead of writing what the First Commandments say Christians and Jews must do with their faith, he wrote what Congress can't do with everyone else's. And in those first 5 commandments, there are pretty obvious parallels to modern law. Remembering the Sabbath is a direct precursor to work holidays and weekends. And nearly every legal system has harsher sentences for people who commit crimes against their parents. Speaking of crimes, here's one where the 10 Commandments and every legal system agree. Thou shalt not kill. Let's skip the next one because there's another easy one at number 8. Thou shalt not steal. The last 2 are a bit trickier. If you learned number 9 like I did, you were taught, don't lie. But most translations of the Bible have a version of, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Basically an antiquated definition of perjury. The commandment to not covet presents a difficult legal challenge, similar to the Articles of Faith in the first 5 commandments. How do you prove your neighbor is coveting your stuff? That's the difference between a moral code and a legal one. A difference James Madison expertly committed to paper. So that's that, except for the commandment we skipped. In Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Michigan, adultery is a felony, though it's not often prosecuted. In another 13 states, it's a misdemeanor. In the last decade, states like Utah, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Virginia moved to strike laws making adultery a crime. And that push intensified during the Trump administration as the Supreme Court's conservative supermajority solidified. Why the rush? Well, some advocates of James Madison's approach are expecting more states like Louisiana and Oklahoma to look at the 10 Commandments and ask, why aren't they the law?
One in 5 Americans think violence could be necessary to reach their political objectives in 2024. That's according to a new NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll. That may only be a little more than 20% of Americans, but it's still an alarming number. However, research varies on this topic, with other polls showing lower numbers. Here's what some of you across the country had to say about political violence and the way this country has become so divided.
It's a disaster and a nightmare. There's too much acrimony and the sides are too polarized.
It's sad. It's ugly. It's scary.
I am concerned about violence following the election.
We see already the violence that had happened in the past, so I could definitely see it happening again with this election.
I think January 6th was a shock for all of us, and we shouldn't be shocked anymore.
I think it could be worse than that. Something broader than January 6th. It could be around the country even.
I pray for our country. I pray for unity. I don't know if it's possible. I have faith and hope, but man, it's dwindling, but I still believe in this country.
Joining us now is Princeton University political scientist, Dr. Lauren Wright. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. You know, the fact that more than 20% of Americans believe violence may be the answer when it comes to the upcoming elections is quite alarming, but does that surprise you?
It does. The best possible research I know about this comes from my colleague at Dartmouth, Sean Westwood, who leads the Polarization Research Lab. And what they find is that these surveys showing vast support for partisan violence are actually really severely overstated. And part of that just comes from replicating the surveys. They asked over 100,000 people what they thought about this. And once you ask the question a different way and exclude people who speed through the survey, it's actually much closer to 4%, even 3% among Democrats and Republicans. So I don't see that kind of disheartening evidence in the data myself.
Right. And in this survey of those polled, and there were, 28% said they believed violence was the answer. 28% were Republican, only 12% were Democratic, and 18% were independent. So from what I'm gathering, those numbers don't really seem consistent with what you've heard.
They don't. And I actually don't think there's big partisan differences in this one way or the other. I'll go back to the overall picture in a second, but the same research I just mentioned asks about specific acts, like, for instance, the most extreme one, partisan motivated murder. Do you support that? And it actually finds about 2% of Democrats say yes and 1% of Republicans say yes. So there's certain areas where Democrats seem to have more propensity for this than Republicans, and vice versa. But again, we're really splitting hairs here. It's a fringe, a very small sliver of the American population. Most people don't support this in any way, shape, or form. And that, I think, should be encouraging to people.
The January 6th attack shocked the nation. But as a political scientist, Did you see that coming when you look back at politics in this country and the way they've unfolded in recent years?
I don't think anyone who's being really honest completely saw it coming. I mean, it was an event that we haven't seen in over 100 years in our country, anything like it in our history, really. And, I think that Trump's ability to motivate his supporters to commit violence, in some cases, to be very disruptive at the least, and to do real damage at the most, and put people's lives at risk, I think is very, very concerning. And, some of my colleagues who study media and politics might have said, if you looked at the online chatter activity, if you looked at how angry people are at each other and Trump's ability to rile those people up, you wouldn't have been surprised. But I am still surprised because I study political communication. I teach a graduate class on that. And, Julia, a lot of people in this country don't even vote. And so expecting that they'll somehow take up arms against their neighbors on a large scale, especially now after January 6th, I don't think we'll see anything close again. And yes, I was very surprised when it happened, and very, very upset.
Yeah, it was certainly a very upsetting, remarkable event. And during that day, we saw lawmakers and public officials' safety threatened, including, every member of Congress that was there, Vice President Mike Pence, then Vice President. But before that, we saw Congressman Steve Scalise and Senator Rand Paul. They were victims of political violence. How concerned are you for the safety of lawmakers going forward?
Well, I do think at any time in American history, lawmakers have received attention, an outsized amount. But now I do think they're targeted and publicized in a way they haven't been, just because of the media environment. And so we're seeing more security precautions, which are absolutely appropriate. And I think if there's any silver lining to January 6th, it's that, again, Capitol Police, different intelligence organizations, different government offices are ready that this is at least somewhat of a possibility, and they've now put more resources and attention behind this. So I think it's appropriate.
I want to go to a recent poll from the Associated Press and the NORC Center for Public Affairs Research that found that the majority of Americans still share the same core values. 9 out of 10 U.S. adults said they feel the right to vote, the right to equal protection under the law, and the right to privacy are extremely or very important. Lauren, how is it possible for a nation to share these core values but at the same time remain so deeply divided?
I think a lot of it is how the news is framed. And I'm so glad you ended up on this optimistic note, because it's true. Americans do share a lot of values, and we see that across a range of policies too. When we ask people, do you want better healthcare? Do you want teachers to get paid more? Do you want to secure Social Security for the future? Do you support Medicare expansion? Most Americans say yes. It's just on the details. How do we pay for this? Who should pay for this? Where you see opinions start to split up. And so, yes, Americans still share core values. Most Americans are moderate, even though they lean one way or the other. They tend to identify more with patriotic values than they do with criticism of the country. And so yes, on these big things, Americans are in step, and it's important to remember.
Just to wrap here, Lauren, we're in the middle of a really tumultuous election cycle with two very polarizing candidates. Is there any hope in sight for unity?
I think so. We only have two choices in this country. We have RFK Jr., of course, too, this year. But we have a, simple majority, single ballot system. And we're probably never going to elect a third party candidate. So a lot of the strife we see is not that people absolutely love Joe Biden and absolutely love Donald Trump. A lot of voters are just looking and they're choosing what they see as the lesser of two evils. And so that really underlines this theme of more unity than division. But when you have to make a choice, people do pick their sides and fight very hard.
That's a really good optimistic note to end on, and some very important context.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I really appreciate it. Dr. Lauren Wright, thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia.
That's it for What's America Thinking. I'm Julia Manchester. Come back next week.